Yo, what's going on, Blackish University? It's your boy B coming at you with another reaction. We're going to switch it up a little bit. This isn't a hip-hop reaction. This is why the U.S. government murdered Fred Hampton. And for those of you that don't know who Fred Hampton is, he was born in 1948, and he died on December 4th, 1969. So you can do the math there, right? It looks like he was 21 years old. If I did that right? 48, 58, 68, yeah. He was an American civil rights leader, and he also was the deputy chairman of the Black Panthers Party. I believe he's from the Illinois chapter, and he also formed Chicago's very first Rainbow Coalition. I know a lot of people hear that and they think of Jesse Jackson, but he was actually killed. Fred Hampton, again, he's an activist. He was killed during a raid on his home by Chicago police officers. Obviously, it's a very sketchy story, but there's been a lot of talk about how he actually died, why someone would want him dead. And I want to check out this video. I just came across it. It says, why the U.S. government murdered Fred Hampton. Let's check it out together and see if we can learn some more about our own history and what has happened to people who have been activists in the past and have stood for what they believed in only to be assassinated, like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King Jr. Without further ado, let's get to it. Looks like it might be animated. Put my thinking cap on for this one.
December 4th, 1969.
It's the day he died.
Akua Njeri was 19 years old and sleeping next to her fiancé, the Illinois Black Panther Party chairman, Fred Hampton.
The next thing I remember was someone in our room shaking Chairman Fred. Chairman, wake up, wake up. Plaster was flying off the wall. You could smell the cordite from the gunshot. If you've ever been under gunfire, 5 minutes is 5 hours. To you, it seems like forever. The shooting started back again. Then another voice unfamiliar to me said, "He's good and dead now." I knew they were talking about you.
Wow.
Fred Hampton was murdered by his government. But before that, he was a leader in a movement practicing a new kind of activism. A movement targeted because of its power to unite people.
And again, I referenced this on one of our last videos, and I've heard before that the white population, right, of our country, they want you to believe that you're the minority when in fact they're the minority. Most of the people in this world are brownish or blackish people, and just the fact is, if we were all to unite, we can have a very smooth world, and we can all share its resources. But these people that are the small minority that wants to maintain power, they're maintaining it because the people aren't united. So it's in their best interest to make sure that there's division between us, whether it be political or geographic or whatever it might be. But let's get back to it. Missing chapter. And shout out to Vox for doing stuff like this.
In race relations, on July 2nd, President Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act. It was
in the 1960s, racial progress in the U.S. was at a turning point. Activists won major civil rights victories, and the era of Jim Crow laws came to an end. But at the end of the decade, there were still deep social and economic gaps for Black people across the country. Black Americans continued to face high poverty, poor housing, and unemployment, and they still had little to no political representation. These disparities and an increase in brutal police violence led to uprisings across the country. Many young Black activists grew frustrated that the changes they'd hoped for hadn't come.
It's like just the opposite of being a white man. That's bring it that fight.
Right? It doesn't take much. You don't need to articulate a full sentence to describe, what we want. justice, right? What we want, freedom, just like somebody else. He said, if somebody asked you, how could you describe racism or what? I don't know what they asked him. He said, man, it's just the exact opposite of how you treat a white person. You treat them with respect, dignity, right? You act like you have some class, but when you speak to someone like us, you somehow think that that they're beneath you. It's crazy to think about. And in this day and age, decades later, whenever I reference something old like that, it's like we're still fighting the same fight. It's just, it's not slavery, right? Now they call you criminals. Now they call you this. It's just another way to maintain power in our country. And it's sad. And scary.
After the police killing of an unarmed black teen in San Francisco, 2 activists in Oakland, California, Bobby Seale and Hugh P. Newton, founded what was initially called the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. Newton had studied law and knew it was legal to carry arms in California as long as they were not concealed. The Panthers began to patrol their communities. As the movement grew, several highly publicized confrontations with police would bring about mainstream awareness of the Black Panther Party. The allegations in these confrontations were serious, but the public accounts of them were typically one-sided and shaped largely by police. Media coverage depicted party members as a caricature of black militants.
And it's funny because this is exactly what happened with hip-hop, right? It's the powers that be, however you want to frame that. They started to frame hip-hop for these being like it's either you're on the police side or you're on hip-hop side. And, as people are asking, hey, are police harassing people in our community because of this hip-hop culture? Is it just another way of attacking our communities without necessarily saying race? And they framed it where it was, they still do it now. Look at the Blue Lives Matter movement versus the Black Lives Matter movement. Why can't you be part of both? I have a really close friend that's a correctional officer. His life does matter. He's a black dude. He grew up in the hood with me, inner city Chicago. I'm not saying blue lives don't matter, right? We're just saying that Black Lives matters, and we need to do better, and with everyone. But it's funny how this is it's like a publicity stunt, what we used to call PR back before social media. But you had to frame things in a way where if you attack, let me take it back and let me just go off for a minute here. There's something called it's a psychological operations campaign. And if you've never heard of the term, it's actually a military term. I'd recommend that you Google it. It's something the military's done for years. It's a way to basically control how people think or feel about another segment of the population. So you might do it when you're taking over. Good examples are like with Bin Laden or Saddam Hussein. They create whatever it might be, propaganda, so that you're actually backing the government. And you can see it when Bin Laden was captured and people are clapping, right? Or Saddam Hussein and they're tearing down the statue or burning his money. But, a lot of people argue, have we released a psychological operations campaign within our own community? Are we so numb to seeing people get harassed and bullied by the police? We're so numb to seeing murders that we think of it in a different way, and we're always framed as the monster so that we can be eliminated without an uproar. And this is how I think what happened with the Black Panther Party. People, the media, they want to frame it in a way like demonize these guys so that you want to take away from the good that they're bringing to the community and their original message. Kind of reminds me of Black Lives Matter.
The Black Panther Party was portrayed as a marauding gang. They say their goal was to kill all the white people.
In reality, the Panthers did call for radical change.
What they were hoping for was a revolution to overthrow the capitalist enterprise.
But what they called revolution might not actually sound so radical today.
Focused on socialism as a way of solving economic needs. They looked to places like Canada, which always had a democratic political system, but the economic system has always been socialism. So they want a democratic socialist country here in the United States, which they saw as a more equitable, more humane system.
They released a 10-point plan for broad social reform that called for an end to police brutality and for Black employment.
Again, this is
housing,
so relevant today.
education, and freedom from prison and jails. Chapters began forming across the country. They started to implement social programs, which they called survival programs.
The Panthers would say, put that theory into practice. If you really want to change minds, if you really want to meet the people where they are, you have to give them the services which they need.
The programs included food and clothing drives, free health clinics, and sickle cell disease testing, and were funded largely by volunteers and donations from businesses. One of their biggest programs was a free breakfast for children initiative.
Here we are living in 1966, 67, with the most wealthy nation in the world, and kids were going to school hungry, especially in African-American communities. So one of the first community service programs were free breakfast for school children.
And all the children had to do was come.
It was during this time that Akua and Jerry, then known as Deborah Johnson, met Fred Hampton.
I was a student at Rice City College, and Chairman Fred had come up to the school and speak. And he'd say, in the breakfast program, we're feeding over 3,000 children a week.
Wow.
We're serious about making power to the people of reality. We're not just sitting up here jaw-jabbing and talking shit, you know. We about work. And I said, damn, he's serious about this business.
Fred Hampton grew up in Maywood, Illinois, just west of downtown Chicago. He became president of his local NAACP Youth Council in 1967, at 19 years old. Shortly after, he was recruited by a founder of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party.
Because of his charismatic skills, he quickly rise to the
He got that Carlton look.
Here he is at age 21, building and leading the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party.
Soon after they met, Jerry and Hampton became a couple.
Anybody that has met him or heard him speak, they say he wasn't bullshit. He was for real.
You got to understand, you got to be private people. You better struggle, you better win. You better not struggle, and goddamn, you don't deserve to win. Let me just speak to you if you really fight for it.
Chicago, in particular, was a place where the party's ideals especially resonated. It was then the second largest American city, and due to decades of discriminatory policies, also one of the most segregated.
Still one of the most segregated.
Chicago's mayor at the time, Richard J. Daley, opposed neighborhood integration. And in the 1950s, the city had begun to redevelop certain neighborhoods, pushing low-income residents out and into densely packed, high-rise public housing
Ghettos.
in already overcrowded neighborhoods. Black people were pushed primarily to the south and west side of Chicago. A large Puerto Rican population was here in Lincoln Park, and poor white people were concentrated here.
You know what's funny? This pretty much stayed the same until the city wanted to reclaim cities that were closer to downtown. And we saw this happen with Cabrini Green and a lot of these housing projects where this is prime real estate. Lincoln Park, which if you guys are not from or familiar with Chicago, Lincoln Park, you might, you're finding buildings that are $500,000 plus to be in that prime area. So they tore down Cabrini Green when they needed it, when it was people who had been, they displaced these people. And, you would argue that, oh man, there's somewhere better. But I was watching this documentary and people wanted to stay there. It kind of reminded me of the old school quote, trust the devil you know. It's normally you give that advice to a girl who wants to leave her husband and go off with this new man she met from work. And, a wise mom or dad might say, hey, you trust the devil you know. Your guy might be out doing X, Y, Z, but at least he's not coming in whipping your ass or, whatever it might be. So that's where that kind of comes from. But that's what happened. They took all these people and they displaced them. So you had these there was a structure of a gang community and a hierarchy within these communities that was destructive. And a lot of these people were moved to the west or south side of Chicago, and they were just put in these places where there was already gang history. So now you got something where it might be vice lords, stones, GDs, and they're all living in the same area, when before, if you would, there was a method to the madness, which caused a lot of the problems that we see in Chicago today. But without further ado, let's get back to Fred Hampton and what's going on in Chicago here.
Here in Uptown. These groups all faced similar problems.
They all had to lock their schools. They all had to lock their homes. They were all being drafted into Vietnam. Very few of those communities had health care.
In 1969, Hampton led the Panthers towards an unexpected alliance, a coalition of activists working across racial lines against a corrupt city government that threatened their communities.
We're going to fight racism, not racism, but we're going to fight it out there.
What they had in common was their poverty. So they was building a revolution based on class solidarity that transcends race. That they all had the same hell to pay.
Hampton named the group the Rainbow Coalition. It included the Black Panthers, a Puerto Rican group called the Young Lords, and a group called the Young Patriots, made up of largely poor white migrants from Appalachia who had moved to Chicago seeking economic opportunity.
We don't hate the motherfucker white people, we hate their president, whether he be white, black, brown, or yellow.
I don't mean see people like y'all and make a quilt. I'm talking about bringing them together on common things they can unite on. Not everything, but who could say that children do not deserve to have a healthy meal?
We will work with anybody who's going to pull this, anybody that has revolution on their mind. We're not a racist organization because we understand that racism is an excuse used for capitalism.
Hampton and other Panthers helped the Young Lords and Young Patriots launch their own social programs. They organized protests together. And it was working. Members were traveling across the country to organize Rainbow Coalition chapters.
Particularly where Black Panther chapters were, but also in these rural white communities as well, to bring the revolution to bear. This blows people's minds. These people are not supposed to get along, but here they are operate as brothers of the struggle, as revolutionaries against the capitalist structure.
You know, and that's one thing we talk about now, that, you know, you talk about all this Republican versus Democrat, right? And it's, you know, I think it's so much deeper than that. It's more the haves than the have-nots. And, you know, you have this illusion of middle class here in the United States. But it's something where, I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen this, but like I said, if you take, and again, don't quote me on the accuracy of the color ants, but if you take black ants and red ants, right, and you put them in a jar, they're fine. They all live amongst each other fine. But when you shake up that jar, they start to kill each other. And they think that they're attacking each other. And they just maintain in this chaos. And, you know, when you think about that, and you have to ask, well, who's shaking the jar? You know, does it really matter if we get this political figure of the Democratic Party in if he's not doing what's important to our communities? Is it the reason that Donald Trump won? There was a lot of white America, a lot of rural America that said, hey, we're not being heard. This guy is listening to us. Think about how powerful the movement would be if we had those, what they call the deplorables, right? I'll own it, right? If that were part of me, it's like, just like people say the hood. You get in a hood vote. Let's think about if we united and had that power that, we're not going to be for these discriminatory practices. There needs to be immediate change. Think about how powerful that movement would be.
And that was the threat to the state at the local level, but also at the national level.
In 1968, the FBI had sent around this internal memo. It outlined goals to prevent the coalition of militant black nationalist groups and prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. It wasn't written about Hampton specifically, but by 1969,
Chairman Fred Hampton was the one that fit the bill.
The revolution was in the air. And the ways in which the Panthers were able to transcend those racial lines, especially their charismatic leadership of one like Fred Hampton, they saw him as a greater threat even than Martin Luther King or Malcolm X ever was.
Man, so much of this is so interesting to me. Like, what happened? Now, did the Black Panther Party just get so worried that their members were being attacked after Fred Hampton was murdered? Did it just disband, or were they just vilified so much that there was no more public support for the group? This is really interesting. I read that, at its peak, which I believe was 1970, they had offices, it says, in 68 cities and thousands of members. So I'm just curious, when did that go? Did they just disband?
Breakfast program. They claimed their real purpose was to poison minds with anti-white propaganda.
Sounds like critical race theory to me.
Youngsters in hate and violence.
The FBI, under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, had deemed the Black Panther Party as the #1 threat to the internal security of this country.
Wow.
The FBI operated a counterintelligence program called Cointelpro. It was a program that targeted dissident political groups in the U.S. Their methods typically went outside the law.
They were using tactics such as assassination, discrediting, false narratives. They were falsely putting people in prison and exile, which were all illegal.
Wow.
Several Black Panthers were killed or imprisoned, including the party co-founders. In Chicago, the party was also targeted by Mayor Daley and the Chicago police.
Our office was burned down at least 3 times. People would disappear. You never see their bodies again.
Before you go to bed, man, I am a revolutionary. Make that the last word. In case you don't wake up, then somebody might believe it, and you might end up in what they call a revolutionary happy hunting ground.
Hampton, a rising star at just 21 years old, knew he was a target too. He'd been arrested in 1968 for allegedly robbing an ice cream truck and handing out $71 of ice cream. In 1969, he was sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison. He appealed and was released on bond, but lost the appeal. He'd have to return to prison by December 6th.
Didn't hear about this in school.
On December 4th, around 4 a.m., 14 Chicago police officers arrived outside Hampton's apartment on Chicago's west side. Inside, Hampton and Jerry and 7 other Panthers were asleep.
I was very pregnant, and the first thing I remember was Chairman Fred had fell asleep while talking on the phone. The next thing I remember was someone in our room.
Start shaking the chair.
Chairman, wake up, the pigs are vamping. And I'm seeing Chairman Fred look up, and then he laid his head back down real slow.
Officers kicked open the door and shot a clerk, a visitor from another party chapter.
Wow.
They shot a sleeping 18-year-old named Brenda Harris. Then they shot in the direction of Hampton's bed.
Matt going to steal bullets for you.
I had moved over on top of Chairman Fred because there was shooting into our mattress. The person that had come into the room kept shouting, stop shooting, we have a pregnant sister in here. Eventually, the shooting stopped.
And Jerry was forced into the kitchen when she heard another voice.
Someone said he's
Very loud. You're very late. I assume they talked about him, Fred. Pig said, he's good dead now.
As they took me out and jammed a revolver to my stomach as I was handcuffed behind my back. I didn't look towards our bedroom because I didn't know what I would see or how I would respond.
The police fired nearly 100 shots. Fred Hampton
Think about that,
and Mark
100
Webb
shots.
were dead. The 7 surviving Panthers were arrested, and police smiled as they removed Hampton's body from the scene.
That's sickening.
The Chicago police and the state's attorney's office quickly shaped the narrative to call it a gunfight, a battle, and a shootout.
Officers involved in the raid testified that they were fired on from 4 different rooms in the apartment by shotguns. Before I could get past the threshold, there were 3 shots fired from the rear bedroom.
They played back a story that you could not even fathom. They gave a fictional account of what happened. Again, vilifying the Black Panther Party.
Maybe you were firing at police. Yes, sir. We saw the shots coming out of the 2 bedrooms. This attack by the Black Panthers on the police clearly demonstrates the true character of the Black Panther Party.
But experts and lawyers hired by the Panthers, along with other journalists, inspected the crime scene. The Panthers even opened the apartment so that anyone could examine it, and a drastically different picture emerged. It was clear that the police had fired unprovoked. Of the nearly 100 shots fired, only one possible shot could have come from a Panther's gun, likely from Mark Clark at the front door. The bullet holes that the police said came from Black Panthers were nail heads. Later, it also emerged that the FBI had assisted Chicago police with the raid. The FBI had an informant within the Black Panther Party named William O'Neill, who had become chief of security and Hampton's bodyguard. O'Neill had provided the FBI with a hand-drawn floor plan of the apartment, which the FBI then gave to Chicago police, and evidence strongly suggests that before the raid, O'Neill had drugged Hampton. In the years after Hampton's assassination, the police and the FBI continued to imprison dozens of party members across the country. The official Black Panther Party would continue to exist until 1982, but membership decreased dramatically, and it would never be the same.
Now, each one of you would be that and let people say, look, we've been struggling, we've been living, and I think that struggle is going to come. Why don't you live for me? Why don't you struggle for me? Why don't you die?
Fred Hampton.
You know, this reminds me of a really interesting thing, and this is, again, going back to the 90s. For those that are hip-hop heads and students of hip-hop like myself, you remember the Fugees, right? The Fugees, the score. And they said something very interesting. He said, yo, you want respect, and you're going around, you're shooting all these people that look like you in your own block, and you have nothing to fight for. You don't even own your own home on the block, but you're fighting for your block. If you really want to impress me, he said, why don't you shoot the person that shut off my lights? Why don't you shoot the people that charge me higher interest rates? Why don't you shoot the people that hurt this neighborhood and make decisions that affect this neighborhood? And trust me, if you were to do that, and you start from that approach, I guarantee you change will happen, right? Don't go shooting people that looks like you. That's easy. That's not the way to go. Dedicate your life to something you believe in.
Hampton wanted revolution. Those in power wanted to destroy him and what he stood for. But they weren't totally successful.
Chairman Fred lives. You know what I'm saying? Through the military assault, through the destruction of the party as an organization itself, by the state, the legacy of the party is still here.
Today, the work of Fred Hampton is alive through some of the same programs that marked him as a threat.
Many of the programs that the Panthers created are now staples of our society. We didn't have free breakfast in schools prior to the Black Panther Party's free breakfast program. Those free clinics, almost every major college campus got a free legal aid clinic. The ways in which sickle cell testing is now respected as a disease by the CDC and others. None of that stuff existed before the party. I think that's revolutionary.
The history of the Black Panther Party is going toe-to-toe with this government will never die. Never die.
And again, this makes you think, right? Why is it that they wanted to silence these young intellectual brothers? What is it about their messaging? What is it about uniting that they couldn't handle? I really like this video. I definitely want to check out more. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like videos and videos like this, and let's check them out together.